Thanks to my toy boy.
So, Dan, it's a pleasure to be joined with you this evening. I wondered if we could start really at the start of your career and your days in Stratford-upon-Avon. And I wondered if we could start by asking, what was it like to have the opportunity for 5 years to be able to express yourself, learn the craft in such a safe and yet challenging environment?
Well, to begin with, I started in repertory in Chesterfield before I got to Stratford. I'd always wanted to go to Stratford, but I did a certain amount of apprenticeship, being a stage manager in Chesterfield Rep, and it was incredibly valuable. One of the most valuable experiences was when you were on the book in a play, and on the book means you're prompting. And I was also playing a part, so I was in costume prior to going on to make my entrance, and then somebody would come and take the prompt book from me, and I'd go and play my part. And at the side of me, I had the lighting cues, or amber, stand by, red for go, and all the cues were written into the prompt book. And behind me was something called a panotrope, which was in fact a turntable with an arm, and it had records on it with all various sound effects, car arriving, car leaving, or music. And at the end of the play, I would stand up and pull the curtain. And I was in Broadway last year, on Broadway rather, in a musical, and the stage management were there with their headphones and their walkie-talkies and sort of glinting lights, communicating all over the theatre with all the people who were working in the theatre. And I told them about my experience as a stage manager, and they simply could not believe it. That at one stage, as a 19-year-old, I was doing what they were doing, and I was in fact in charge of the production. And there were very many moments that I look back on with great pleasure, not least of which was when we were doing an Agatha Christie play, and I was supposed to play on the panotrope as the curtain came down on the first act, The Ride of the Valkyries, and I'd got the wrong record on the turntable, and it turned out to be Jimmy Shand and his Dancing Dustman. So that was my preparation to going to Stratford, and when I eventually reached Stratford, which was after a year of repertory, I was incredibly lucky because it was the last year of the director. He was called Glenn Byam Shaw, and he decided to go out with a bang. So he was inviting a huge and stellar cast of people. The first production was Othello. I was a walk-on, by the way. I was not even playing small parts. I was simply a walk-on in all these productions. And what a privilege that was. And the first production was Othello, with Paul Robeson playing Othello, and Mary Ure, Sam Wanamaker was playing Iago, and Albert Finney was in it, playing a small part. Listening to that text with Paul Robeson, this absolutely astonishing voice, was amazing. The second production was Midsummer Night's Dream with Charles Laughton playing Bottom. The third production was Laurence Olivier in Coriolanus with Dame Edith Evans. Vanessa Redgrave was playing a small part. If you can imagine, that was how I learnt, by watching and listening. And I couldn't have had better teachers, because each night you'd note a subtle difference in a performance, a different inflection. And each night you were hearing consummate actors dealing with verse. And the way they dealt with it, the way they turned it to their use, to their personal use, still observing the verse, but making it entirely personal within the character, was a very profound early lesson for me.
Do you think those same opportunities as experiences are there today for young actors, or has the industry changed?
Well, unfortunately, it has changed, and what happened later on at Stratford was that after Glenbyam Shaw left, Peter Hall stepped in. He was young and extraordinarily passionate, and he instigated lessons in verse speaking, lessons in movement, lessons in singing, and he actually nurtured young talent, something which has never been done subsequently, alas, and something that I benefited from immeasurably. Companies such as that was in those days don't exist anymore. It's shifting, and they don't take people on and train them up, allow them to fail. I have to say, I have failed many times in my profession, and I'm being perfectly honest with you when I tell you that I learnt more from within my failures than I ever learnt from my successes. So actors in those days were given the license to fail, and I think that has now disappeared.
And do you credit the longevity of your successful career to that classical training?
I credit it to that classical training, to the desire to learn and keep learning and experimenting and throwing yourself into whatever next came. I didn't have a route. I didn't have an ambition. In fact, I had a dear friend I'd known for 50 years, and I don't know, somebody had asked me a question, and I started to question myself, and I said to him, was I ambitious? And he said, no, you weren't. You were just grateful. And I think it's true. I've just always been grateful for whatever has been offered me, and if it expanded me in a way, any way, I would embrace it, because there is simply no point in standing still in whatever you do. You have to keep moving and learning.
So would that be your advice to any up-and-coming actors today, simply to take whatever opportunities?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And don't look down on anything. It may be rubbish, but you might learn from it. You might learn something from other actors. And you're out in front of an audience. I mean, always remember, what's the point of staying at home waiting for the part? The best thing you can do is to go out and practice and perform in front of an audience, or a television camera, or a film camera.
Then you said before that when you moved into television, the actors at the RSC despised you, and you said you were despised for leaving and going to television.
Yeah. Well, Peter Hall said, oh, she's going to waste herself on stupid television. But what they didn't understand, because those were early days and a perfectly justified remark on his part, was that television has become the huge generator of talent, which then feeds back into the theatre. I mean, it's completely cyclical now. You can start in the theatre and move into television. That's the first thing I did when I was famous and I could put bums on seats. It was after I think it was the first season of the Avengers, and I went back to Stratford and I did Twelfth Night, and I was actually playing Avengers. I was filming Avengers Monday, Tuesday, and I'd go to Stratford and do Wednesday matinee and evening and Saturday matinee and evening in Twelfth Night. And I have to say, it was great, because it was both sides of the spectrum. It was at either end. It was absolutely wonderful.
Do you think it's easier to start in the theatre and learn the classical trade and then move into television?
I don't think there's any prescribed route. It just depends on you and how lucky you are. I mean, I was immensely lucky that I'd been 5 years at Stratford. I mean, I'd been a year in rep, and then I went to Stratford and I was there for 5 years, and then I got this television job, and then I went back to Stratford. And from then on, I was off and running because the Avengers had catapulted me into I was famous, which it would have taken me 20 years on the stage to reach that degree of fame, if that. So television is incredibly powerful, incredibly important, but let's not forget it's sort of restrictive as well, and you've got to keep your options open, and my belief is for longevity you have to go back to the theatre, because theatre audiences are the most faithful audiences of all.
So do you think that then with the Avengers and then moving into James Bond, did you at any point whilst doing that fear that you were getting to be typecast, you were going down a certain road that would be hard to come back from?
Well, not with the Avengers, yes, I could have been, but then I went back to the theatre, and I did a couple of televisions, and then I did the James Bond, and I mean, everybody asks about it. I knew exactly why I'd been cast. I was there. George Lazenby was, he had no experience in acting. I think he'd just done advertisements. And I was there as a professional to sort of guide him through, which I was very happy to do, up to a point. It didn't end entirely happily, as you probably know. Although the film itself is much loved. I mean, and George was pretty good, but he was just extraordinarily difficult, and so they didn't ask him back. And I think he must deeply regret it, because he truly wasn't bad at all.
Then was it hard dealing with the advent of fame that came with the Avengers and James Bond? Or did you take to it naturally?
No, I didn't. Well, you don't know now that in those days, all the huge publicity machine that concentrates on television stars now, it didn't exist in those days at all. So to be well known was a very strange experience, and to be recognized was a very strange experience. And coming from Yorkshire as I did, to be called a sex symbol was absolutely extraordinary, and I simply didn't know how to handle it at all, because you didn't talk about sex in Yorkshire, ever. Still less flaunt your sexuality. So I was not very good at flaunting. And rather sort of walked away from that aspect of my fame. Yes. People nowadays, I mean, it's such a different world that it's without sounding dreadfully old-fashioned, it's very, very hard to explain. For example, the young, there were no jeans. No. You were dressed as a middle-aged lady. I was. You wore skirts and twin sets. There were sort of dresses called horrocks that you'd wear in the summertime, which middle-aged ladies still wear. But they're the only things available to you. There was no pop music, not really. Chubby Checker, that was about it. It was completely different, and I was, in those days, completely at sea.
So you said before again that you felt uncomfortable becoming a sex symbol and didn't know how to deal with it. Do you think the industry today has moved further down that road and that it over-sensualizes women and young actors?
Well, it's a choice. It's a choice. You can either go into it and use it, and a lot of young actresses do, and as a result are very successful. or you say, I have certain priorities and my sexuality isn't top of my list. My profession as an actress is. And that is the part of me that I wish to concentrate on, and that is the part of me that I will develop.
Do you think it's hard for young female actresses to turn down the chance for fame in that way, and then having to pursue, as you said, maybe a longer time in theatre and a longer time learning the craft, if the opportunities are arriving more so from them as...
Well, I think you could be sidetracked, and I think possibly it requires strength of character to maintain, keep in sight what it is you want. Not necessarily an end product of fame or whatever, but to know yourself, know how far you have to develop, how much of yourself should be developed. The voice, for example. Years ago, I did Medea, which was very testing. Huge arias, A4 speeches, one after the other, page after page. And I developed a voice which, I didn't know it at the time, but somebody said was, in its spoken range, almost as big as a singing voice. And I knew it's very interesting because the vocal cords respond to your thought. You think of a note and the chords accommodate it. That's what singing is about. They're thinking ahead and the chords accommodate it. And the same things happen if you're doing a speech. So the chords have to be trained. In order to sustain the chords, you need breath control. And that in itself is an art. I mean, in the old days, a lot of the old actors could do a sonnet. They could do 14 lines on one breath. That was the test. And I remember the other big part that I did that was really demanding was Phèdre, and Ted Hughes did the adaptation. It was wonderful. And I played it with Barbara Jefford, who was a classical actress, and she was playing the nurse beside me. And there was a passage in the play that I knew should, to do it justice, be spoken on one breath. And I kind of picked it out as something to aim for, something to succeed in during the run of the play. And I kind of stalked it, and bit by bit got closer and closer until suddenly one night, bingo, I'd got it. And as we came off the stage, Barbara turned to me and said, "Well done." And I know that what she'd done was put herself in the same place and said, this is the way this particular passage has to be spoken. And we had that sort of wonderful tacit understanding of an older generation recognizing what the younger generation was trying to do in order to serve that character. And it was great.
So I wondered about your stage career. What has been both your most fond memory, but also the thing that you're most proud of?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, really. Earlier I was talking to some people, and Medea started very small with Jonathan Kent directing at the Almeida, and it was sellout, but no West End producer picked up on it. And I forget what we did. I know, we did All for Love afterwards, but all the time Jonathan and I were saying, I could tell there was more life in this play. It wasn't dead. It had further to go. So after All for Love ended, we went to see Bill Kenwright, and I said to Bill, please resurrect it. Trust me, it'll work. And Bill, he pretended he'd seen it. He hadn't, but he said, yes, oh yes, I'll do it. Wonderful, wonderful, he said. So bless him, he did. We toured all around England. And each place we toured at, there was absolutely very little advance publicity, very little word of mouth. But we played a week in each place, and gradually we built. So by the end, we were playing to a full house in each place we went to. And then we went to London, to Wyndham's Theatre, where we were sellout. And then a Broadway producer picked up on it, and we went to Broadway. And we became sellout in Broadway, which was, for a 2,000-year-old play, absolutely fantastic. And I begged the producers to put Euripides' name up in lights, because I thought 2,000 years afterwards, wonderful, let's put him up there. And they said, no, it'll put the people off. And I said, well, I'll pay for it. No. And they refused to do it. But there we were, on Broadway, a sellout. And it was the same company all the time, all the way through. We stayed together. And that, to me, is the perfect experience to have with a play, that you start so modestly and without any true thought that it would ever take the journey that it did. But it did, and it was a miracle, and I look back on it with such pleasure. Just yes.
So when you talk about touring, where is the most interesting place you ever toured to?
We toured, the Royal Shakespeare Company toured behind the Iron Curtain in the early 60s. And I think the most interesting place was Russia. We played Moscow and Leningrad. Moscow was actually, Leningrad, we played the Len Soviet Palace of Culture, which was 2,000 people. I swank now that I played 2,000 people. It was a nightmare. There were little ladies in booths in the front doing simultaneous translation. And you can imagine simultaneous translation spreading over 2,000 people. And the playback was listening to budgerigars, literally, like that. When we played in Moscow, it was fascinating because we were the first Western company, been there quite a long time. The students hid themselves all over the theatre just to hear it. They were up in the gantries, they couldn't see it, just to hear it. They hid in dressing rooms, anything they were so hungry. And I remember meeting Madame Fuertzova, who was the Minister of Culture. And she was extraordinary. She was so sort of seniorial. She said, yes, my pupils are now ready to read. And she was deciding what they could and couldn't read. And you went to we went to a gallery, which was, the paintings were chosen by the Central Committee, and under each painting that had been accepted were 8 copies. And you thought, where's creativity? Gone. Khrushchev, I met Khrushchev, this very imposing gentleman. Well, we all did, because he came backstage. And he came backstage after seeing Comedy of Errors. I think he must have been very confused by it. He didn't have much of a sense of humor anyway, but Elizabeth Spriggs, wonderful actress, was playing the courtesan, and she had a costume on that was very revealing. She had very generous breasts, and Khrushchev was absolutely fascinated by these breasts. And there was a bowl of sweeties on the table, and the Russian sweeties are big. You know Quality Street, but they're big Quality Street sweeties. And Elizabeth Spriggs, he kept on putting these sweeties down her cleavage. And when you saw him, years later making state visits and everything, you thought, I know you. I've seen you sticking sweeties down Lizzie Spriggs' cleavage.
So I wondered, before we open up questions to the audience, if we could jump to a slightly different matter. So as you said earlier, in 2002 you took on the Daily Mail when they wrote a libelous article about you.
Well, they didn't write libel. They just wrote rubbish, and they just put words. Are we surprised? And they just put words into my mouth, and I felt I had to, and I was advised not to, and everybody said, "Oh, it's, you know that cliche, it's tomorrow's fish and chip wrapping." Well, it isn't. It just isn't, because they said I have a house in France. Somehow they found out where I was. They sent a photographer out there. They photographed me with a huge baguette saying "shopping for one." They then said I was in retreat. I had retired and was living as a recluse in France. Now, this is pretty damaging, and it's also pretty undermining. It's almost like, you know, you are going to retire. They are dictating your life. So I had to fight back, and it was a tortuous process. I wouldn't advise it to anybody, because they fight dirty. Of course they do. I was absolutely fascinated by the ladies that they had on retainer, and they were women. And there they were with their power suits and beautifully groomed. They were all on retainers. And there they were, lying, manipulating the law in order to prove a point which was a lie. So I had to fight it, and I did, and we won, thank goodness. The editor of the Daily Telegraph said, would I like to write an article about it? So I did. And the response I got from the general public, from people who'd been in a similar case, I remember a father whose daughter, her reputation had been trashed by the Daily Mail, and she'd had no redress at all. I am anti the press of this kind that like to throw mud at helpless people. I disagree, and I will fight if ever it happens again.
And then post the Leveson inquiry, do you think things have gotten better in this regard?
Well, I think they know that there is a point at which the law will step in. That much they have recognized. Whereas before there was, I mean, this was patently, in my respect, it was a complete lie, and they actually retired me. And this was 30 years ago. To be retired? And interestingly enough, for months later, people said, "Oh, I thought you'd gone to live in France." I mean, the power of these newspapers is huge. Never underestimated them.
It's a poignant point to open to the floor. So if you'd like to put up your hand if you've got a question, and wait for the microphone to be brought to you. So is there a first question? Yeah, to the gentleman over there.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a wonderful talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was very fascinating. But my nan's about your age, and she always enjoyed watching you when she was younger. She thought you were sort of class incarnate, because she came from a very sort of humble working class background. But she was very surprised when she saw you on Doctor Who a few years ago with a very Yorkshire accent. So have you ever wanted to have had a bit more chance to be a bit less, sort of Medea and Shakespeare, and a bit more Yorkshire when you've been acting?
Yeah, well, I am from Yorkshire, and I'm very proud of it too, I may say. Although I was brought up in India, my dad went out there and built railways, and I was brought up there. And yeah, I'd love it. I mean, everybody thinks, because I speak the way I speak, but I can do a bloody good Yorkshire accent. Yeah. So I hope I do a part, with a northern accent with huge pleasure.
Let's take another question. Let's jump over to the gentleman on the front row. on the front row.
Thank you. What do you think about more or less recent developments in directing and staging, moving away further from what conservative people might call the intention of the author, if that exists or plays a role?
Well, I don't quite understand it because we are there to serve the text. I mean, this is fundamental to our profession. And when you deviate from the text, you aren't doing your job. I had a very interesting encounter with Arthur Miller years ago in Boston, and he was getting a prize, and I was there, and we got there too early, and I suggested that we went, of course, and had a drink, which we did, and I'd seized the opportunity, and it was such a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to this God. And I said, you know, please, of all the plays that you've seen, that you wrote, from the beginning, when you see them again years later, what are the most crucial differences have you noticed? And there was a pause, and he looked at me and said, ruefully, personality. And that says it all, doesn't it? That people choose to bring their personality to a part instead of serving that part.
Do you think there's any value in that if a famous actor or actress brings their own personality, that can get, especially young people, a lot more of them through the door to see the play, even if it relinquishes some of the...
Well, I'm not suggesting that because they're famous, they necessarily, manipulate or distort the part that they're playing. I think quite the opposite for the most part. They tend to serve the part. But they are obviously mesmeric performers, and so they become very watchable. But they don't all distort. I think it's the distortion that authors resent. And if I were an author, I'd resent it. No, that's not the way I saw it. Why bring what you think is important to it instead of what I think is important?
Let's take another question. Yeah, to the hand just behind.
Thank you so much, and you're a real inspiration, first of all. And I wondered, when you were doing the Avengers and James Bond, did you do any of the stunts yourself, or did you have a stand-in for those?
I had a charming girl who would stand in for me from time to time. But I used to, I was quite fit. I used to do quite a lot of the stuff myself. In the Bond, I didn't ski. I couldn't ski. So there was a gentleman who was dressed up as me skiing. And he was called Willy Bogner. He came from a famous Alpine family, and they all skied, and he was a champion skier and everything. And he said to me one day, would you like to know how it feels to ski? And I said, yeah, but how? He said, I'll give you a piggyback. It was the sexiest thing you've ever done in your life. And we piggyback down, just down. And of course, you have to move with him as one and take his rhythm and all that. And oh God, it was absolutely wonderful. It didn't end in a carnal relationship, but it was the closest thing.
Let's take another question. Yeah, to the hand just along the row.
Lady Olenna is obviously a fan favorite in Game of Thrones.
Yes.
I was wondering, could you tell us about how you, in preparation for the part, came to sort of understand the character?
Well, we've been talking about this, haven't we? Evil. How much evil do I have in me? And I honestly think, well, first of all, playing a baddie is much more interesting than playing a goodie. they're boring. But a baddie has an infinite capacity for evil and drama. Yeah, so I didn't prepare. It's all on the page. You know, you learn it. And, you know, within the human condition, which we all have within us, all the recipe, and there is a degree of evil. I recognize it. I mean, I couldn't kill, but I recognize the motive behind killing. Jealousy. Have you all experienced jealousy? Yes? You're all being shy, aren't you? You're being shy and saintly. Well, I don't agree. A lot of you have experienced jealousy, and jealousy is the springboard to all sorts of evil, isn't it? Really. And so if you felt that little wiggly germ of evil, then you can expound on it in any direction you want. That's why I find playing baddies so absolutely wonderful. And then I come out of it and I'm a saint.
Let's take another question. Yeah, jump over to the hand over there. If you just wait for the microphone, just 1 second, just being passed out.
Hi, thank you. Lady Olenna, again a fan of Game of Thrones. I just wanted to know that you also read the novels before acting in Game of Thrones, or you just stick to scripts?
Oh, no, you stick to the script. The question was, did we improvise?
No, I wanted to ask you, did you also read the novels before you acted in Game of Thrones?
Did you read the novel?
Sorry, no.
Yeah, to the hand. Yeah, you, sir.
Well, first of all, I have to say that having taken out Joffrey, I don't consider you a baddie. But keeping on the Game of Thrones theme, what was your favorite scene to act, and who was your favorite co-star?
Well, I think the last scene was just the best scene to play. I mean, God, what a gift. I think Charles Dance, because I'd worked with him a long time ago. We did an Ibsen together a long time ago. And it's lovely when you reconnect with actors. And he's wonderfully old actor laddie, isn't he? And so it's great playing. It was great playing with him. And I'm very fond of him. Non-carnal.
Who's been your favourite co-star to work with across your career?
I've worked a lot with Alec McCowan, whom you wouldn't remember. I worked a lot with, a certain amount with Ian Richardson. Yeah, Simon Russell Beale I did a play with. You get very close to people, and it's wonderfully bonding. There are some directors who sort of, I don't know quite where it comes from, who decide that it's time to play trust games, and I'm afraid I think I sort of check out of that, because the greatest trust you can ever show is to step on stage with somebody, and you so need each other, and you so rely on each other, and you so stimulate each other, and you so challenge each other, that it's all there to experience.
Wonderful. Let's take another question. Yeah, to the hand. Yeah, you, sir. You, sir.
Thank you. A couple of weeks back, I listened to a talk by Mark Williams, the actor who played Arthur Weasley in the Harry Potter series, and he talked about how very much when you come to acting, you have to bring your own personality quite a lot to the role that you're playing, or else you just kind of fade into the distance and you don't make yourself distinguishable, which I found quite interesting in what you were saying about how you have to kind of be fundamentally loyal to the text. So do you think, in terms of an actor making themselves successful and perhaps even bringing their own spin on a text, do they have to be fundamentally a slave to the text, Or do you think it's encourageable that they can take their own interpretations upon it and make a text like Medea applicable to the modern age?
I think you phrase it wrongly because you say slave to the text. I would say serve the text. And the point at which you learn how far you have to travel is knowing yourself, and understanding the character that you're playing, and knowing how far you have to travel to subsume yourself into that part. I hope I've made that clear, that you aren't a slave, but you serve it. In other words, it is greater than you. It has to be, because it's been conceived by somebody else, and a great deal of thought and care and work has gone into it. And you have, I think, to recognize that and serve it. In other words, I put writing, I worship good writing. Where would we be without good writing in our theatre? I mean, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have careers. We'd have no means of earning a living. Without good writing, I mean, I've worked with bad writing, and you do what you can to turn it into good writing, and doesn't always work. In fact, seldom works. But really good writing is such a gift. Why distort it to serve your own purposes? I don't understand that.
So where do you allow your own personality to flow into the text? How do you allow that to frame it?
There are all sorts of ways. Yeah, I mean, it's you, apart from anything else. It's your voice, it's your brain, it's your body interpreting. It's your wit. There's a lot, but it needn't be to the detriment of the text, to the detriment of the character you're playing. I've seen some performances, and believe you me, they are riveting. You know, these stars who are doing their thing, they're absolutely brilliant. They're riveting. Some of them, not all. The best. And you sit there and think, you are brilliant. You're just brilliant, but you're not serving your text. Sorry, darling, no.
Let's take another question. Yeah, to the hand over there in the back.
Hi, thank you. So there's the classic cult horror film, Theatre of Blood, and I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your journey with that film and what that film means to you, because it's fantastic.
Well, I loved it. I don't know if you've seen it. I very seldom recommend, but it's such a hoot. And it's a right old Theatre of Blood is what it's called, and there's a lot of blood. And I played with Vincent Price, who was, oh God, such a delight. He was heavenly. And he was a Shakespearean actor, and he had to say, quite a lot of Shakespeare, and he was very good at it. I mean, here he was, master of the macabre and the, the horror movie, and he's just a waste in a sense, because he was a very, very good Shakespearean player. He told me, we had plenty of time together, laughing. He had a wonderful sense of humor. And he told me about Boris Karloff and, now who's the other horror movie star? Does anybody remember? It was Boris Karloff and, can you remember? No, not Vincent. There were two of them, and they were, no, American. Not Lon Chaney, another one. Anyway, trust me, there were these two together. And Boris Karloff, let's call him Mr. X. Boris Karloff and Mr. X were neck and neck as to be king of the horror movies. And Mr. X died before Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff had a little lisp. And Vincent Price turned up to the funeral with Boris Karloff to Mr. X's lie-in. And as they approached the coffin, Vincent Price told me this, Boris Karloff leant over the coffin and said, "You're not putting me on, are you, sweetie?" Which I think absolutely is wonderful. And the other thing is, Vincent Price, Coral Brown was in the film as well. A lot of stars were in the film. And Coral Brown and Vincent were doing a sort of little pavan around each other, and I knew I knew that something was going on. They were both well into their 70s. And Vincent asked me to go to a charity performance with him one Sunday, so we went in the car, and Coral was there. And we went to the loo together in the interval, and Coral was in the next cubicle. Guy had this wonderful voice of hers saying, "It's a long time since I've fancied anybody of my own age, but I fancy Vincent Price." So I thought, aha. And on the way home, Vincent said, "It's Coral's birthday next week, and I don't know what to get her for a present." Now, Vincent was really mean. So I said, "Vincent, you have it on your person and it won't cost you a penny." Did you get it?
Let's take another question. Back the hand here.
This is just very quick. Was the person you're thinking of Bela Lugosi?
Sorry?
Bela Lugosi? The horror
Exactly right, Bela Lugosi. Ray! Thank God for Google, hey?
Let's take another question. Yeah, to the hand, yeah.
Hello. I think I am one of the lucky ones. I was in London. I came to see you in Medea. You were magnificent. I mean, your voice, the way you walked on stage, I was mesmerized. I was just like, and it's my first days in London, and it was the first play I never forgot. And I think it's something going to stay the rest of my life, and that night and watching you. And up until now, I thought that was your real voice, and it was really powerful, the way you walk on the stage with that voice. How do you cut off your coming from a character? Is it difficult to be Diana Rigg again after playing such a strong performance?
It's a dear question, but the point is, no, I have no difficulty at all. I don't carry anything home with me, ever. There is simply no point. Some actors do, fine, that's the way they choose to live. For me, I put everything into that time when I am at the theatre, and I love the preparation. You know, you're there before the curtain goes up, you're there I'm generally there an hour beforehand. It's not that I'm getting into character so much as the preparation of being by yourself and putting the makeup on, putting the costume on, and then I love the walk to the stage, and I love that stepping on stage and that moment when you encounter the audience and you think you're into that scene, but at the same time there's a consciousness about what kind of an audience is it tonight? What are they like tonight? And in a very instinctive way, you sort of putting out feelers to see if they're quite what they're like. Are they with you? Are you going to have to win them over? Are they sitting back, folding their arms, saying, "Show me"? Or are they longing for you to succeed? And that is what I love about it. And it might sound pompous, and I do hope it doesn't, but it is a communion. The audience, when you think about it, they come to believe. So it is a communion, and it is our responsibility to meet that belief with all the powers and art of our profession.
Let's take another question. Yeah, the hands over here.
Hiya. So as someone who's obviously played in a lot of Shakespeare plays, how do you feel about places like the Globe doing gender bends of characters and potentially doing more modernised staging? Because I know there was a bit of a bust-up a couple of years ago with the Globe's director about some of it.
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the end of your question.
I think there was a bit of a bust-up with the Globe's director a couple of years ago about some of it, so I was wondering what your opinion was.
It's about gender bending?
Like, changing the gender of characters. So I think I saw a production of Othello where they had Cassio played by a female. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I haven't seen it, so I really can't comment, and I can only comment at the idea. And I mean, we're at a stage now where all sorts of lines are being blurred. And if that's what the current audience wants, then I say go there. I mean, why not? It either succeeds or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then we'll move on to another form of experiment. Does that make sense to you? I wouldn't shut the door on anything that might, I don't know, bring in a new audience. It's all about bums on seats, isn't it?
Yeah, let's jump to the hand in the back row.
You paint a picture of this rather drab existence when you were, growing up.
Excuse me?
About...
When did I do that?
When you talked about the only thing we had was chubby checker. And I'm putting to you that, of course, we had Elvis. And then in the 60s, in the early 60s, when young men like me thought you were the most wonderful thing since sliced bread as
It's
Emma
getting
Peel,
better, boys.
was the period of the 60s, sex, drugs and rock and roll, and you were out there. I mean, didn't you have a fabulous time in the 60s?
You want me to talk about my sex life?
Not necessarily. But I'm interested
I'm not going to. But in Yorkshire, we didn't have Elvis Presley. We only had Chubby Checker. Poor us. Obviously, things changed radically in the 60s, and thank goodness for it, because when I was growing up, there was a pall of silence over so much. I mean, homosexuality, racism, sex indeed, between even heterosexual sex. Nobody, well, certainly where I came from in Yorkshire, nobody spoke about it at all. And, thank God we've travelled as far as we have now. Next question.
No, I think we've got time for one or two more questions. So, is there any more? Yeah, the hand over here, and then we'll go.
Dame Diana, you span the generations. You burst into my life in Austria when I was a teenager, and you gave me a message as Emma Peel that I could do things that my parents told me I couldn't do. I'm thrilled to see that the audience that's here today is bonding with you in the same way. And in between, we have the amazing real acting that I've seen you do. Could you please tell me how you've achieved this from Emma Peel, which was a little bit saccharine and everything, to today, to the Games of Thrones? Can you explain to me what do you have personally, how do you have achieved this to keep your audience from my age to this age?
I've just been lucky, I have to say, because the parts came. And I had, oh God, yes, I've been out of work. And it was pretty grim. I'd I've compiled a book. I don't know, I'm not, you can't buy it, so I'm not selling it. And it's called No Turn Unstoned. And it's about the history of the theatre and about all the bad notices that everybody got. And I will tell you mine in the end. Believe you me, I won't duck that. I sound like Trump, don't I, when I say believe you me? Does that ring a bell? Shoot. Anyway, so I made a lecture out of that, and I toured the universities in America, and that got me through a really bad period. I think first of all, you have to be lucky, and I was offered Game of Thrones. What a gift that was at my age. Before that, I've done Doctor Who. I'd done, the theatres that I've done, television into infinity, some good, some bad. But at each point, you learn. And I think the fact that I refused to keep just marching on the spot has kept my career going. And I would advise anybody, of coming up to constantly challenge yourself. I think it's the same in any profession. You can't just not want to know. For example, I have a wonderful life outside the theatre. I read prodigiously. For 10 years, I was Chancellor of Stirling University. I was Chancellor of a university. I've been on countless boards. I've traveled the wide world, and not necessarily 4-star. I've been to countries like the Galapagos and Bhutan because it's there. And I long to see and learn and absorb. I was not long ago in Burma. That is what I am. I'm not just an actress. I am a person of very diverse tastes and needs. And I need to be the person I am. To be the person I am, I need to feed it. Does that make sense? Without being hopelessly egocentric, which I'm not. I hope you realize. Well, maybe a little.
And then let's jump to one more question over there.
Hello, I'm a big fan of your performance as Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca, who is one of the most iconic antagonists in literary history. I wanted to know, were you a fan of Daphne du Maurier's novel beforehand, and did you enjoy the experience of playing such an incredible character?
Yes, I loved the question was about Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca. I loved doing it. Judith Anderson, a very great American actress, had done it before me, and I think won loads of awards for it. So it was a bit of a challenge because a predecessor had sort of very much made it her own. The thing that I think, when I was at school, we had a pash. It was called a passion on older girls at school. Not necessarily carnal. It wasn't. You had a, and I remembered that, and I thought there's something about Mrs. Danvers loving Rebecca as she does, and being obsessed by Rebecca as she does, and there's something of the schoolgirl passion for Rebecca. So I had a wig, and it was pulled across, and I had a Kirby grip in it to sort of just be that schoolgirl person. Where something, again, talking about playing people, evil people, bad people, again, and never forget that sometimes the impulse has gone bad, but the initial impulse was love. She loved this woman, but this love turned to an obsession, and the obsession turned into evil, and it developed, and I again thoroughly enjoyed it because it's a wonderful adaptation, and again it's a wonderful book. Yeah, loved it.
Thank you so much. So I think we've got something to...
Yeah, I've discovered this poem, which I think is divine. And I don't think I made you laugh enough tonight. It's an epitaph for an elderly actress by Noel Coward. She got in a rage about age and retired in a huff from the stage, which taken all round was a pity, because she was still fairly pretty, but she got in a rage about age. She burst into tears, it appears, when the rude, inconsiderate years undermined her once flawless complexion, and whenever she saw her reflection in a mirror, she burst into tears, it appears. She got in a state about weight and resented each morsel she ate. Her colon she constantly sluiced and reduced and reduced and reduced, and at quite an incredible rate put on weight. She got in a rage about age, but she still could have played Mistress Page, and she certainly could have done worse than hay fever or Juliet's nurse. But she got in a terrible rage about age. And she moaned and she wept and she wailed and she roared and she ranted and railed and retired very heavily veiled from the stage.